Sometimes I wonder if success is a curse disguised as a blessing. If I had known what would happen, would I still have taken that first step? Would I still have trusted him? Where are you watching from today? Comment down below. I remember the exact moment my life changed. I was standing in a conference room filled with marketing executives, my hands trembling slightly as I prepared to present my ideas. Back then, I was just another corporate drone in a sea of gray suits. I excelled at my job in digital marketing, but I hated every minute of it. The monotony, the office politics, the soul-crushing commute, all of it made me feel like I was slowly dying inside. That day, I'd prepared a presentation on innovative customer engagement strategies. As I clicked through my slides, I noticed a man in the back of the room watching me intently. Not with that dismissive stare most men in business give women, but with genuine interest. His eyes weren't wandering, they were focused on my words. After my presentation, while everyone else rushed to the coffee station, he approached me. "Your ideas are brilliant," he said, extending his hand. "James Ellison. I run a small consultancy firm." His handshake was firm, confident, like someone who knew exactly what he wanted in life. "Sarah Matthews," I replied. "And thank you. Most people in this industry aren't exactly receptive to new approaches. Most people in this industry are dinosaurs waiting for the meteor." He laughed. "Would you like to continue this conversation over dinner?" "I'd love to hear more about your customer retention model." I should have seen the warning signs right there. Who discusses customer retention models over dinner? But his enthusiasm was infectious, and for once, someone was actually listening to my ideas. That dinner lasted 5 hours. We talked about everything: market trends, digital innovation, our shared frustration with outdated business practices. By the time the restaurant was closing around us, it felt like we'd known each other for years. "We should do this again," James said as we stood outside in the cool night air. "The dinner or the business talk?" I asked. "Both," he replied with a smile that made my heart skip. What followed were weeks of late-night discussions in my tiny apartment. My coffee table became our war room, covered in notebooks, market research, and empty takeout containers. We'd talk until 3 a.m., dreaming about what could be possible if we combined our skills. It was during one of these sessions that the idea hit me. I'd been complaining about how inefficient the customer feedback process was in my industry. "It's ridiculous," I said, pacing around my living room. "Companies spend millions collecting data they never use because the analysis process is too cumbersome. By the time they get actionable insights, the market has already changed." James looked up from his laptop. "So what would fix it?" That question sparked something in me. I grabbed a notepad and started sketching frantically. A platform that could analyze customer feedback in real time, using AI to identify patterns and generate actionable insights almost instantly. Something that would revolutionize how companies understood their customers. "This," I said, showing him my rough diagram, "this could change everything." James stared at my sketch for what felt like an eternity. Then he looked up at me with an intensity that took my breath away. "Sarah, this isn't just good. This is our future." Over the next month, my apartment transformed into a startup headquarters. We refined the concept, researched the market, and developed a business plan. Our relationship evolved simultaneously from colleagues to partners to lovers, all wrapped up in the excitement of building something together. One night, after we'd finalized our business proposal, James opened a bottle of champagne. "To us," he said, raising his glass. "To Insight Intelligence." "To Insight Intelligence," I echoed, loving the name we'd chosen. He set down his glass and took my hands in his. "Sarah, I've never met anyone like you. You're brilliant, passionate, and fearless. I don't just want to build a business with you. I want to build a life with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Will you marry me? We'll build our empire together, you and me against the world." Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes." That night, as I lay awake next to James, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. I had found love and purpose all at once. How could I have known what was coming? The next week, we pooled our savings, $30,000 combined, every penny we had, and officially registered Insight Intelligence, LLC. I gave notice at my corporate job, ignoring the concerned looks from my colleagues. "You're giving up a stable career for a startup?" my manager asked, incredulous. "In this economy?" "Sometimes you have to take risks," I told her confidently. "This is something I believe in." My parents were even less supportive. My dad, who'd worked the same factory job for 40 years, couldn't understand why I'd walk away from a good position. "You've always been a dreamer, Sarah," he sighed over the phone. "I just hope you know what you're doing." I thought I did. I really thought I did. The first few weeks of building the company were exhilarating. We rented a tiny office space, really just a glorified closet, and worked around the clock developing our platform. I handled the product design and technical architecture, while James focused on the business model and securing initial funding. "We make the perfect team," James would say, bringing me coffee during our late nights. "You build it, I'll sell it." And sell it he did. James had a gift for networking that I lacked. He could walk into a room of strangers and walk out with 5 potential investors. While I was coding and designing, he was making connections, painting our visions so vividly that people couldn't help but get excited. But those early days weren't all glamour and inspiration. They were also filled with doubt, fear, and ramen noodles. Lots of ramen noodles. Our savings were dwindling fast, and there were nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, terrified we were making the biggest mistake of our lives. "What if we fail?" I asked James one night, after a particularly difficult day of debugging. He pulled me close. "Then we fail together, but we won't. I believe in you, Sarah. I believe in us." His confidence was my anchor. When things got tough, when potential clients turned us down or the technology hit roadblocks, James was there with his unwavering belief that we were destined for success. 3 months after quitting my job, I finally had a working prototype of our platform. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to demonstrate the concept. James immediately arranged meetings with potential clients, confident in my creation. The night before our first big pitch, we stayed up refining my presentation. As dawn broke, James kissed me and said something I'll never forget. "No matter what happens today, I want you to know that building this with you has been the greatest adventure of my life." I believed him. God, I believed every word. The pitch went better than we could have hoped. The client, a mid-sized retail chain, saw the potential immediately. They didn't commit on the spot, but the interest was there. We left the meeting electric with possibility. A week later, they called. They wanted to pilot our platform in 3 of their locations. James and I celebrated by splurging on dinner at a real restaurant. No more takeout for one glorious night. As we clinked glasses, I felt like we'd finally turned a corner. "This is just the beginning," James said, his eyes bright with ambition. "Soon we'll have more clients than we can handle." He was right about that. What he didn't tell me was what "we" would come to mean as our company grew. Or that the empire we were building together would ultimately become his alone. But that night, as we walked home hand in hand, our future stretched before us like an open road. I saw only possibilities. not the warning signs. I heard only promises, not the carefully worded loopholes he was already creating. I had no idea that in giving my heart, my ideas, and my labor to build our dream, I was digging my own professional grave. That the man who looked at me with such admiration was already calculating how much of my creation he could claim for himself. Sometimes I wonder if success is a curse disguised as a blessing. Now I know it can be, when it's shared with the wrong person. They say building a business is like having a baby. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the overwhelming responsibility. What they don't tell you is how much blood you'll leave on the floor. The first year of Insight Intelligence was the hardest year of my life. While others my age were traveling or advancing in stable careers, I was working 18-hour days building our platform from scratch. James and I moved into a cheaper apartment to cut costs, eating ramen and working from our kitchen table when we couldn't afford the rent on our tiny office space. The prototype I'd created was just the beginning. Turning it into a full-fledged, scalable product took months of coding, testing, and refining. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., code until my eyes burned, then collapse into bed only to do it all again the next day. "You're pushing yourself too hard," James would say, bringing me coffee as I hunched over my laptop. "We don't have a choice," I'd reply, not looking up from my screen. "The pilot with the retail chain starts in 6 weeks." So on weekends, I picked up waitressing shifts at a local restaurant. I'd serve mimosas to brunching couples on Saturday mornings, then race home to continue coding in the afternoon. The exhaustion was bone deep, but I never complained. This was our dream after all, worth every sacrifice. "You're amazing," James said one Sunday night, massaging my shoulders as I worked. "I don't know how you do it all." "We do it all," I corrected him. "We're a team." And we were. Despite the stress and the strain, those early days held a magic I sometimes miss. The pure creation of something from nothing, the shared vision, the way James would bring me dinner when I forgot to eat, or how we'd celebrate small victories with a dance around our cramped living room. 6 months into our venture, we decided to get married. Nothing fancy, just a small ceremony at the courthouse with a few friends as witnesses. We couldn't afford a honeymoon, and honestly, we couldn't spare the time away from the business. During the ceremony, as we were saying our vows, James's phone rang. One of our pilot clients was experiencing a critical error with the platform. I saw the panic in his eyes. "Go ahead," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "Take it." He stepped aside to answer while I stood there in my simple white dress, waiting. When he returned, his face was grim. "They can't access any of the data. The entire system is down." The judge looked confused as I pulled my laptop from my bag, right there in the courthouse. "Can we have 5 minutes?" I asked him, already opening my computer. "Now, where were we?" I asked the judge. We finished the ceremony, signed the papers, and went straight back to work. That was our honeymoon, a pizza delivered to our apartment as I monitored the system to ensure it remained stable. But that crisis turned into an opportunity. The client was so impressed by our immediate response that they recommended us to a larger company in their network. Suddenly, we had a meeting with a potential client that could change everything. A nationwide retail corporation looking for exactly the kind of customer insight solution we offered. I spent 2 weeks perfecting the platform for the demonstration, barely sleeping, running on caffeine and determination. The night before the meeting, I found a critical flaw in the algorithm and stayed up until dawn fixing it. "You should get some sleep," James urged around midnight. "I'll sleep when we're successful," I replied. The next morning, bleary-eyed but focused, I walked into that boardroom alongside James. Despite my exhaustion, I delivered a flawless demonstration. The executives were visibly impressed, asking technical questions that I answered with confidence while James handled the business inquiries with his usual charm. A week later, They offered us a contract worth $100,000, our first six-figure deal. That night, he opened a bottle of champagne. Real champagne, not the cheap stuff we'd been drinking. "To us," he said, raising his glass, "and to making you officially co-CEO. It's time we updated the paperwork to reflect what's always been true." I was touched by the gesture, though I hadn't realized I wasn't already officially co-CEO. In my mind, we'd always been equal partners. It hadn't occurred to me to check the legal documents James had filed when we started the company. With that contract, everything changed. We could finally afford proper office space. We hired our first employees, a developer to help me with the platform and a sales representative to support James. We started paying ourselves actual salaries, modest, but enough to stop my weekend waitressing. The retail corporation became our anchor client, and their endorsement opened doors we'd previously struggled to get through. Within months, we had 3 more clients and a growing reputation in the industry. I threw myself into product development with renewed energy. Every client had unique needs, and I worked tirelessly to customize our platform, add new features, and ensure everything ran perfectly. I personally trained each new client on the system, troubleshot problems, and incorporated their feedback into updates. "You've created something revolutionary," one client told me after a training session. "This is going to transform how we understand our customers." I beamed with pride, not just at the compliment, but at what James and I had built together. When I shared the comment with him that evening, he smiled. "I tell everyone we couldn't have done this without Sarah's brilliance," he said, kissing the top of my head. "You're the brains behind all of this." I soaked up his praise like a plant starved for sunlight. Between the endless work hours and constant pressure, those moments of recognition kept me going. What I didn't realize then was how differently James spoke about the company when I wasn't around. How he gradually shaped the narrative of Insight Intelligence as primarily his vision, with me as a valuable but secondary contributor. Looking back, I can see all the warning signs. How James insisted on handling all the financial and legal aspects while I focused on product development. How he'd sometimes introduce me as our technical genius, rather than my co-founder or co-CEO. How certain meetings would be scheduled when he knew I'd be tied up with development deadlines or client training. But at the time, all I saw was our dream becoming reality. All I felt was gratitude for a partner who believed in me, who championed my ideas, who told me repeatedly that we were in this together. I was too busy building our empire to notice the subtle ways he was claiming it as his own. Success changes people. That's what they say, right? But sometimes it doesn't change them. It just reveals who they truly were all along. The day we hit $1 million in annual revenue should have been the happiest day of my professional life. I remember staring at the quarterly report in disbelief, double-checking the numbers to make sure it wasn't a mistake. "We did it," I whispered to myself in the quiet of my office, tears welling in my eyes. All those sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the doubt. It had all been worth it. I practically ran to James's office, bursting through the door without knocking. He was on the phone but smiled when he saw my face. "I'll call you back," he told whoever was on the line, hanging up. "What's got you so excited?" I placed the report on his desk, pointing to the number with a shaking finger. "We did it. $1 million, James. We actually did it." He glanced at the report, then broke into a wide grin. "Well, would you look at that?" He stood up and pulled me into an embrace. "I told you we'd make it, didn't I?" That night, we celebrated properly. An expensive dinner, champagne, even a hotel suite instead of going home. It felt like a milestone, not just for the business, but for us as a couple. Proof that we could accomplish anything together. The next day, James called an all-hands meeting to share the news with our team, which had grown to almost 30 people. We had moved into a real office in a downtown high-rise, with actual departments now. Development, sales, customer support, marketing. I sat in the front row, beaming with pride as James addressed the team. But as he spoke, something subtle shifted in the air. When I had the vision for insight intelligence, he began, I knew it would revolutionize how companies understand their customers. My vision has always been to create the most powerful, intuitive customer insight platform on the market, he continued. My vision? I frowned slightly, glancing around to see if anyone else noticed the shift in pronouns. But everyone was focused on James, who continued to talk about growth projections and expansion plans. After the meeting, I pulled him aside. Hey, what was that about your vision and your company? I thought we built this together. James looked surprised. It's just a figure of speech, Sarah. Everyone knows we're a team. I was just trying to keep the presentation simple. His explanation made sense, and I let it go. But over the next few weeks, I began noticing a pattern. In investor meetings, James would subtly position himself as the primary founder, with me as the technical talent he'd brought on early. In press interviews, he'd talk about his idea that I had helped execute. When I confronted him again, he seemed genuinely confused by my concern. It doesn't matter who gets the spotlight, Sarah. We're a team. The important thing is that the company is successful. But it does matter, I insisted. This isn't just your company, James. We built it together. I created the product that makes us special. He softened, pulling me into a hug. You're right. I'm sorry if I've been hogging the credit. It won't happen again. He kissed my forehead. I couldn't do any of this without you. I wanted to believe him. I did believe him. So I focused on what I did best, improving our product, expanding its capabilities, training our growing team of developers. The platform was my baby, and I poured everything I had into making it the best it could be. But as our success grew, so did the distance between James and me. Subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. He began traveling more, attending conferences and meetings in other cities. Our dinners together became less frequent, our conversations more focused on business logistics than shared dreams. Then came the day James announced he'd hired a new CFO, his college roommate, Mark Wilson. You hired a CFO without discussing it with me? I asked, stunned. We were in our bedroom, getting ready for bed after a long day. James shrugged as he unbuttoned his shirt. Mark's perfect for the role. He has experience with high-growth startups and connections with venture capital firms we want to court. That's not the point, James. We're supposed to make these decisions together. I'm your co-CEO, remember? It was a time-sensitive opportunity. He had another offer, and I had to move quickly. James's tone was dismissive. Besides, you've been so busy with the development team, I didn't want to distract you with administrative details. Administrative details? Hiring a C-level executive was hardly a minor decision. But before I could argue further, James's phone rang. He glanced at it, then back at me. I need to take this. It's the Singapore team. The arrival of Mark changed the dynamic of our company in ways I hadn't anticipated. Suddenly, there were financial meetings I wasn't invited to. Discussions about company structure and future funding happened without my input. When I asked about these exclusions, James always had a reasonable explanation. It was just a preliminary discussion. We knew you were swamped with the new feature rollout. It was mostly technical financial stuff you wouldn't be interested in. Each explanation seemed plausible on its own, but together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. I was being systematically sidelined from the business aspects of the company I had co-founded. One evening, as I was looking for a document on our shared cloud drive, I stumbled across a folder labeled Financial Restructuring. Curious, I opened it and found several spreadsheets and documents I'd never seen before. One was a list of bank accounts I knew nothing about. I confronted James the next morning in his office, closing the door behind me. "What are these accounts?" I asked, showing him the printout I'd made. "Why don't I have access to them?" James looked momentarily surprised, then composed himself. "They're just operational accounts Mark set up to streamline our finances. I was going to tell you about them in the next executive meeting." "There's over $1 million in these accounts, James. How could you not mention them to me immediately?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You're being paranoid, Sarah. This is exactly why Mark handles the finances. You get emotional about numbers. These are just standard business accounts for different operational needs." "Emotional? I'm not being emotional. I'm asking legitimate questions about company finances that I should have been informed about." James stood up, coming around his desk to place his hands on my shoulders. "Listen to me. You are brilliant at product development and technical innovation. That's your superpower. Mine is business strategy and growth. We each focus on what we're good at. That's how successful partnerships work." I pulled away from his touch. "Don't patronize me. I'm not just the tech person. I'm the co-CEO. There shouldn't be any aspect of this company I'm not informed about." His expression hardened slightly, though his voice remained calm. "No one is keeping secrets from you, Sarah. Focus on what you're good at, the products. Let me worry about the business side." That night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. James and I had built this company from nothing. We'd struggled together, celebrated together. Why did it suddenly feel like we were on different teams? As I lay there in the dark, James sleeping peacefully beside me, a small voice in my head whispered that perhaps I'd been naive, that perhaps I had been so focused on building our product that I'd failed to protect my place in the company I'd helped create. I pushed the thought away. James was my husband, my partner. We'd taken vows, made promises. He wouldn't betray me, would he? What I didn't realize was that I was already too late. The groundwork had been laid, the trap had been set, and I was walking right into it with my eyes wide open, but seeing nothing. They say the most effective betrayals happen so gradually that by the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment the final phase of James's plan began, though I didn't recognize it for what it was at the time. "We've got an amazing opportunity," James announced during our executive meeting. "Metrotech Retail is interested in implementing our platform across their Asian markets." My eyes widened. Metrotech was one of our largest clients, and expanding into Asian markets would be a significant step for our company. "That's fantastic," I said, already mentally calculating the development resources we'd need to accommodate regional differences. "The thing is," James continued, "they want someone from leadership to oversee the implementation personally. It would mean relocating to Singapore for about 3 months." It made sense. I was the technical expert, the one who could ensure a smooth implementation. And yet, something felt off about the suggestion. 3 months is a long time to be away, I said hesitantly. "What about the new features we're developing here?" "Your team can handle it," James assured me. "You've trained them well, and this is a critical opportunity for us. Metrotech could open doors throughout the entire Asian market." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. You're the only one who can do this right." His eyes held mine, and I felt that familiar warmth, that sense of partnership that had defined our early days together. How could I say no? "Okay," I agreed. "I'll do it." James beamed. "I knew you would. You're going to be amazing." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Briefing my development team, setting up remote workflows, packing for a 3-month stay in Singapore. James was uncharacteristically attentive during this time, helping me prepare, assuring me that everything would be fine in my absence. "We'll video chat every day," he promised the night before my departure. "It'll be like you never left." I should have seen it for what it was. The calm before the storm, the final act of kindness before the betrayal. But I was blinded by trust, by the belief that our shared history meant something. Singapore was exhausting, but exhilarating. I worked 16-hour days, customizing our platform for the Asian market, training the Metrotech team, troubleshooting issues as they arose. I was so consumed with making the implementation successful that at first I barely noticed how infrequent James's calls had become. "Sorry I missed our call yesterday," he'd say. "Emergency board meeting ran late." Or, "We've been swamped with the new funding round. I'll catch you up tomorrow." Tomorrow would come, and there would be another excuse, another delay. The daily video chats he'd promised dwindled to weekly, then bi-weekly. When we did speak, he was distracted, vague about company developments, quick to end the conversation. 6 weeks into my stay, I received an email from Elena, one of our senior developers. It was sent to my personal account, not my company one. "I don't know if I should be telling you this," she wrote, "but there have been a lot of closed-door meetings happening. James and Mark keep talking about restructuring and new leadership directions. People are starting to wonder what's going on. Thought you should know." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I called James immediately. "What's this about restructuring and new leadership?" I demanded when he answered. There was a pause before he responded. "Just some organizational tweaks to streamline decision-making. Nothing major." "Then why haven't you mentioned it to me? I'm co-CEO, James. These aren't decisions you should be making without me." "They're preliminary discussions, Sarah. I didn't want to bother you with hypotheticals while you're focused on Metrotech. We can discuss everything when you get back." His explanation was reasonable, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. I started paying more attention to the company emails, the meeting invites, the project updates. Gradually, I noticed how many discussions I was being excluded from, how decisions were being made without my input. I called our company lawyer, who had helped us set up our business structure years ago. "David, I need a favor. Can you send me all the corporate documents for Insight Intelligence? The latest versions, I mean." "Of course," he replied, "though I'm surprised you don't already have them. James had me prepare several updates in the past few months." Several updates? This was the first I'd heard of any updates. When the documents arrived, I stayed up all night reviewing them. What I found made me physically ill. Through a series of seemingly minor amendments and new filings, James had systematically restructured the company. My 50% ownership had been diluted to just 5% through a complicated series of new share issuances and holding company arrangements. There were new board members I'd never heard of, new investor agreements I'd never seen. And buried in the fine print of a document I supposedly had signed, though I had no recollection of doing so, was a clause giving James unilateral decision-making authority in my extended absence. I was shaking as I called James, not caring that it was the middle of the night in the States. "What have you done?" I demanded when he answered, sounding groggy. "How could you do this to me?" "To us?" "Sarah? What are you talking about?" "The company restructuring, James. My ownership being diluted to almost nothing. How could you betray me like this?" There was a long silence, and when he finally spoke, his voice was different. Cold, calculating, no longer maintaining the pretense of partnership. "You should have read the fine print," he said simply. "I'm coming home," I said. "We need to fix this." "That would be unwise," he replied. "The Metrotech implementation is critical to our growth strategy. Abandoning it now would constitute a breach of your executive responsibilities." He was speaking like a lawyer, not a husband, not a partner. James, this is our company. We built it together. How can you do this? Business is business, Sarah. You've been well compensated for your contributions, but Insight Intelligence has outgrown its founding structure. We need a more conventional leadership approach to attract the right investors for our next phase. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Our next phase? There is no our anymore, is there? This was your plan all along. He sighed, as if my emotional response was tiresome. Not from the beginning, no. But as we grew, it became clear that your collaborative approach to leadership wasn't compatible with where we need to go. I ended the call, unable to listen to any more. With shaking hands, I booked the next flight home, not caring about the MetroTech implementation or my responsibilities. I needed to get back, to fight for what was mine. But as I was throwing clothes into my suitcase, another email arrived. This one from Mark, the CFO, James's college friend. Attached was a document outlining the legal and financial consequences of abandoning the MetroTech project before completion. It was, essentially, a threat. If I left Singapore now, they would sue me for breach of contract, for failing in my fiduciary duties, for damages to the company's relationship with MetroTech. The potential financial penalties were staggering. They had me trapped. I couldn't leave without putting myself in legal jeopardy, but every day I stayed in Singapore was another day James had to consolidate his takeover of our company. I had no choice but to finish the MetroTech implementation while frantically trying to understand how I'd lost control of everything I'd built. I reached out to lawyers in the States, but without being there to meet with them in person, without full access to company records, there was little they could do to help me prepare a case. The final blow came when I discovered, through a carelessly forwarded email chain, that James had been having an affair with Vanessa Reed, our lead investor. The personal betrayal shouldn't have surprised me, given the professional one, but somehow it still cut deep. When I finally returned to the States 3 months later, I wasn't just walking into a corporate coup, I was walking into the complete dismantling of the life I thought I had built. And James, the man I had trusted with both my business and my heart, was holding the wrecking ball. Have you ever had that moment when your entire life collapses around you so completely that you can't even process what's happening? That was me the day I returned from Singapore. I expected a confrontation with James. I expected a fight for my company. What I didn't expect was to be met at the office door by a security guard I didn't recognize. There must be some mistake, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm Sarah Ellison. I'm the co-CEO of this company. He checked his tablet. I have clear instructions, Ms. Ellison. You're not authorized to enter the building. This is ridiculous. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling James. Mr. Ellison anticipated your call, the guard said, handing me an envelope. He asked me to give you this. With shaking hands, I opened it right there in the lobby of the building I had helped pay for, in front of the elevator that should have taken me to my office. Inside were 2 documents, a letter from James's lawyer and divorce papers. The letter was cold, formal, explaining that my employment with Insight Intelligence had been terminated due to irreparable breakdown in working relationship and divergent business philosophies. Employment. As if I hadn't co-founded the company. As if I hadn't created the very product that made it successful. The divorce papers were equally calculating, citing irreconcilable differences, and offering a settlement that was a fraction of what our shared assets were worth. There was also a non-disclosure agreement, prohibiting me from discussing company matters with anyone, including potential lawyers who might help me fight this. I stood there in shock, clutching these papers, as employees I had hired and trained walked past me into the building, averting their eyes. Some looked sympathetic but afraid. Others pretended not to see me at all. Finally, Elena, the developer who had warned me, approached. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "They've been planning this for weeks. They told us not to contact you or we'd lose our jobs." "How could they do this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "How could he do this?" She glanced nervously at the security guard. "I can't talk here. But you should know they've already changed all the passwords, transferred all project management to new team leads, and told clients you've decided to pursue other opportunities." Before she could say more, Mark, James's CFO friend, emerged from the elevator. "Elena, your meeting started 5 minutes ago," he said sharply, not even acknowledging my presence. She gave me one last apologetic look before hurrying inside. Mark finally turned to me, his expression cold. "Sarah, I'm surprised to see you here. The letter should have made it clear that your access has been revoked." "Where's James?" I demanded. "I want to speak to my husband." "James is in New York meeting with investors. And given that you've been served divorce papers, I believe the correct term is soon-to-be ex-husband." His tone was clinical, as if discussing a minor business transaction. "Now I must insist you leave before we're forced to call the police." Police? For trying to enter the company I had built? It was surreal. I don't remember how I got back to James's condo. I just remember standing outside the door, realizing my key no longer worked there either. Everything I owned was inside. My clothes, my personal items, my laptop with years of work and personal photos. I sat in my car, still in shock, and called the only person I could think of. My college roommate, Mia, who lived on the other side of town. She came immediately, horrified by what had happened. The next week passed in a blur of legal consultations and devastating revelations. The lawyers I could afford were no match for James's team of corporate attorneys. They painted me as a technical contributor, not a true co-founder. They claimed my role had been administrative rather than executive. They produced documents with my signature, some genuine, others I suspected were forged, that had systematically stripped away my rights in the company. "You should have been more careful about what you signed," one lawyer told me bluntly. "Based on these documents, you've legally agreed to most of what they're doing." "But I didn't sign half of these," I protested. "And the ones I did sign, James told me they were routine paperwork for taxes or investor requirements." The lawyer looked at me with a mix of pity and exasperation. "Unfortunately, my husband lied to me isn't a strong legal defense. You had a duty to read what you were signing." As for the divorce, James's lawyers argued that Insight Intelligence was primarily his creation, that my contributions had been compensated through my salary, and that I had no claim to the current value of the company. They offered a settlement of less than 10% of what the company was worth, coupled with that punishing non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from ever telling my side of the story. "Life isn't fair, and neither is the legal system," she replied grimly. "We can fight this, but you need to understand what you're up against. James has the company resources behind him. He has witness statements from employees who are afraid to contradict him. He has documentation, however questionable, supporting his version of events. So I just give up? Let him take everything we built together?" "Not everything," she said quietly. "But you need to be strategic about what you fight for. The company may be a lost cause. The divorce settlement, we might be able to improve." The court proceedings were a nightmare. James never appeared in person, sending his lawyers instead, as if our marriage and business partnership weren't even worth his presence. His legal team portrayed me as a talented but naive technical contributor who had been fairly compensated for my work and was now being unreasonable in my demands. The judge, an older man who seemed bored by the proceedings, largely sided with James. My technical contributions were acknowledged but deemed appropriately compensated by my salary and the small equity stake I still held. My claim to being a co-founder was dismissed as revisionist, given the paperwork James had accumulated showing his leadership role. I lost my marriage, my company, my identity, and my financial security all at once, I told Mia one night, after another crushing day in court. Everything I've built over the last 5 years is gone. Not everything, she said firmly. They can't take your knowledge, they can't take your talent, and they can't take your ability to start over. I wanted to believe her, but at that moment, all I could feel was the weight of what had been stolen from me. The final settlement was even worse than I had feared. I received a cash payment that seemed substantial until you compared it to what the company was actually worth. I was allowed to keep the 5% equity, but with restrictions on when I could sell it and a non-compete clause that prevented me from working in the same industry for 3 years. The non-disclosure agreement was slightly narrowed, but still prevented me from speaking publicly about how I had been pushed out. "It's the best we can do," my lawyer insisted. "If you don't accept this, they'll drag the proceedings out until you're bankrupt from legal fees." So I signed. I signed away the company I had built, the years of work I had poured into creating something meaningful. I signed away my right to tell the truth about what had happened. And as I walked out of the courthouse that day, I felt hollow, as if James had not just taken my company and my marriage, but had somehow taken parts of myself that I might never get back. When the final papers were signed, I found myself with nothing but a suitcase of clothes Mia had helped me retrieve from the condo, a settlement check that wouldn't last as long as it should, and the crushing realization that the man I had loved and trusted had been planning my destruction while sleeping beside me each night. I had lost everything, and the worst part was knowing it had all been by design. Rock bottom has a clarity to it that nothing else can give you. When you've lost everything, absolutely everything, you finally see the world without filters. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. It was all I could afford while preserving most of my settlement money. No luxury finishes, no doorman, no floor-to-ceiling windows like our downtown condo. Just a basic space with beige walls and worn carpet. But it was mine. The one thing James couldn't take. Every morning, I'd wake up and for just a second, I'd forget. I'd reach across the bed for James, or I'd think about some platform feature I wanted to improve. Then reality would crash down, and I'd remember that I had no husband, no company, and no purpose. I spent the first month in a fog of depression and disbelief. I'd scroll through business news, seeing James's face appear in articles about innovative leadership and visionary entrepreneurs. One particularly painful profile in Business Insider called him a self-made success and described Insight Intelligence as his brainchild. There was no mention of me at all, as if I'd never existed. The non-disclosure agreement prevented me from publicly challenging his narrative. I couldn't even correct the most blatant lies about the company's founding. My voice had been legally silenced. I watched from the sidelines as Insight Intelligence announced a new round of funding, a major expansion, a redesigned platform. I scrutinized the product changes, seeing where they'd tried to build on my original architecture, often unsuccessfully. They were struggling without me, though James would never admit it. "You need to stop torturing yourself," Mia told me during one of our weekly dinners. She'd been my lifeline through all of this, the one person who knew the full truth. "Checking those articles and company updates is just keeping you trapped in the past." "I know," I admitted. "But that company was my life for 5 years. I can't just pretend it doesn't exist." "It's not your company anymore, Sarah. And the longer you cling to it, the longer it'll take you to figure out what's next." 2 months into my new, diminished life, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Sarah Matthews?" A woman's voice asked when I answered. She used my maiden name, which I'd legally reclaimed after the divorce. "Yes," I replied cautiously. Who's this? Diana Cho. I was head of customer experience at Metrotech when you implemented the Insight Intelligence platform in Singapore. My heart raced. I hadn't spoken to anyone from my professional past in months. I remember you, I said. The implementation went well. It did. Your platform transformed how we understood our customers. She paused. Until recently. What do you mean? The latest update is a disaster. Nothing works properly. Data is being miscategorized. Insights are flawed. When we complained, they sent a team that couldn't fix the fundamental issues. I wasn't surprised. The platform's architecture was complex, designed with specific principles that James's new technical team likely didn't fully understand. I'm sorry to hear that, I said carefully, mindful of my non-disclosure agreement. But I'm not with Insight Intelligence anymore. I know, Diana said. That's why I'm calling. I've moved to Visionary Partners as their investment director. We fund promising tech startups. Another pause. I always knew you were the real genius behind Insight Intelligence. The platform has gone downhill since you left. I gripped the phone tighter. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this. Because I believe in your talent, Sarah. Not the company brand, not the platform as it exists now, but your vision. Your understanding of what businesses truly need. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't despair. I have a 3-year non-compete clause. I can't work in customer analytics. Non-competes restrict you from creating a direct competitor, Diana countered. They don't own your mind or your expertise. You could create something adjacent, something that approaches the problem from a different angle. The flicker grew stronger. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we meet for coffee and discuss possibilities. No commitments, just a conversation. I agreed, more out of curiosity than hope. The next day, at a cafe far from the business district where I might be recognized, Diana laid out her thoughts. The idea took root immediately. It wasn't direct competition. It was an evolution. A new direction that utilized my expertise without violating the non-compete. It would require sophisticated predictive algorithms, I mused, my mind already racing with possibilities. Machine learning that identifies patterns before they become obvious. Exactly, Diana smiled. And it would solve problems Insight Intelligence doesn't even recognize exist. For the first time since my world collapsed, I felt that familiar spark of creativity, of purpose. I grabbed a napkin and began sketching ideas, talking through potential approaches. Diana watched with growing excitement. This is exactly what I expected from you, she said when I finally paused. This isn't just a business opportunity, Sarah. This is your comeback story. I hesitated, old fears surfacing. I don't have the resources to build something like this. And after everything with James, I'm not sure I can trust a business partner again. You wouldn't be working for me or Visionary Partners, Diana clarified. We would be investing in your company. You would maintain controlling interest and final decision-making authority. I've already spoken with our legal team about structuring an agreement that protects you absolutely. It sounded too good to be true. Why would you do this for me? Diana's expression softened. Partly because I believe this concept could be incredibly valuable, but also because what happened to you was wrong and too common. Women in tech build something brilliant, then get pushed aside when it becomes successful. She leaned forward. I want to back someone who will create not just a great product, but a different kind of company. One that doesn't repeat those patterns. I left that coffee shop with something I hadn't had in months. Hope. And more than that, a sense of possibility. That night, instead of checking James's latest press coverage, I opened a new document on my laptop and began outlining ideas for my new venture. As my fingers flew across the keyboard, a realization crystallized. James had taken my company, but he couldn't take my expertise or my creativity. Those belonged to me alone. Over the next few weeks, I refined the concept, meeting regularly with Diana and her team. With each development, the pain of what I'd lost began to recede, replaced by excitement for what I was creating. "You look different," Mia commented during our dinner. "There's life in your eyes again." "I feel different," I admitted. "For months I've been defining myself by what was taken from me. But maybe that's not the end of my story. Maybe it's just the difficult middle." She raised her glass. "To difficult middles and triumphant endings." As we clinked glasses, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Diana, confirming that Visionary Partners was prepared to provide seed funding for my new company. The amount was enough to build a small team and develop a prototype. For the first time in almost a year, I went to bed that night without the crushing weight of loss on my chest. Instead, I felt something I'd thought James had permanently destroyed. The belief that I could build something meaningful again, that I could start over. He took my company, but he couldn't take my vision. He took our marriage, but he couldn't take my future. Those were mine to reclaim. And looking back now, I realized that moment wasn't just an awakening. It was the first step toward a redemption I couldn't yet imagine. They say living well is the best revenge. I used to think that was something people said to make themselves feel better about losing. Now I know it's the absolute truth. It took 6 months of intense work to develop the prototype for Prescience, my new predictive customer experience platform. I worked from my tiny apartment, sometimes not leaving for days, fueled by a determination I hadn't felt since those early days with James. Except this time, everything was different. This time, the company was truly mine. I hired a brutal lawyer, a woman who specialized in protecting female founders, to draft ironclad operating agreements and ownership documents. I read every single clause, questioned every term, understood every implication. Never again would I sign something without comprehending its full meaning. "This is the most founder-protective agreement I've ever drafted," my lawyer said when we finalized the documents with Diana's investment firm. "No one will be able to push you out of this company." Diana and Visionary Partners proved to be everything they promised: supportive, strategic, and committed to my vision and leadership. Their seed funding allowed me to rent a small office space and hire a lean but talented development team. I was transparent with every person I brought on board. "I'm building this company differently," I told them during interviews. "Equal pay transparency, shared credit for innovations, no politics, no favoritism, just great work that we're all proud of." Some thought I was naive. Others were drawn to precisely this vision. The team that formed around me was extraordinary, not just in their technical abilities, but in their commitment to building something meaningful together. The day we launched our beta version to 5 test clients was the most terrifying and exhilarating day of my life. I'd built something new, something that was wholly mine. If it failed, there would be no one else to blame. But if it succeeded... 3 weeks after the beta launch, I received a call from our largest test client. "Your platform predicted a significant shift in our customer engagement patterns 2 weeks before it happened," the VP of Customer Experience told me, awe in her voice. "We were able to adjust our approach before it became a problem. I don't know how your algorithm saw it coming, but it saved us from a potential 15% drop in satisfaction scores." Similar calls followed from other test clients. Prescience wasn't just working, it was exceeding expectations, identifying patterns and predicting shifts that traditional analytics platforms, including Insight Intelligence, couldn't detect until after they'd occurred. Within 6 months, We had expanded from 5 beta clients to 20 paying customers. Within a year, that number had grown to 50, and we were turning a profit, much faster than industry averages for SaaS startups. I was rigorous about controlling our growth, about maintaining our company culture, about ensuring that every client received personalized attention. I wasn't building a company to flip or to take public as quickly as possible. I was building something sustainable, something ethical, a stark contrast to what Insight Intelligence had become under James's leadership. 18 months after launching Prescience, we hit $2 million in annual recurring revenue. The industry began to take notice. Articles appeared about the innovative predictive platform disrupting customer analytics and the rising star company challenging established players. Some of those articles mentioned my history with Insight Intelligence, usually in vague terms due to my non-disclosure agreement. But industry insiders knew the story, or versions of it. They knew I had built something new from the ashes of what had been taken from me. Around this time, I received an unexpected email. "Sarah, I've been following Prescience's progress with interest. Your predictive approach is impressive and addresses needs our platform hasn't fully captured. There might be synergies worth exploring between our companies. Perhaps we should discuss potential collaboration." James. I stared at the email for a long time, a storm of emotions churning inside me. 2 years ago, I would have given anything to receive this kind of acknowledgement from him. Now, reading between the lines, I understood what was really happening. Insight Intelligence was struggling. Without my technical vision guiding the platform's development, they had fallen behind. User complaints were increasing, and several major clients had already jumped ship to Prescience. James wasn't reaching out to collaborate. He was reaching out because he needed me. I drafted and deleted a dozen responses before settling on a single line. I'm not in the business of second chances. Hitting send felt like closing a door that had been left partially open for too long. There would be no reconciliation, no partnership, no forgiveness. I had built something new, something better, and I had done it without him. With Prescience's growing success came new opportunities and new responsibilities. I was frequently asked to speak at industry conferences, to share insights about predictive analytics and customer experience. At first, I declined most invitations, still feeling the shadow of my experience with James and Insight Intelligence. But gradually, I began to accept these opportunities. Not to promote myself, but to promote a different vision of leadership and company building. At one such conference, a young woman approached me after my presentation. "Your story inspired me to leave a toxic co-founder relationship," she told me, eyes bright with emotion. "I was afraid to start over, but hearing how you rebuilt, it gave me courage." That conversation sparked something new in me. I began to realize that my experience wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a pattern that repeated across the industry. Women who built companies only to be pushed aside. Founders who trusted the wrong partners. Innovators who didn't protect themselves legally. I launched the Founders Protection Foundation with a portion of Prescience's profits. The foundation provided legal resources, mentorship, and support to entrepreneurs, particularly women and minorities, to help them protect their innovations and leadership positions. Building a successful company isn't enough if we don't change the culture that allows predatory business practices to thrive, I explained during the foundation's launch event. We need to create structures that protect innovation and credit those who truly build. 3 years after launching Prescience, I was invited to accept the Women in Business Innovation Award, a recognition of both the company's success and the foundation's impact. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of peers and aspiring entrepreneurs, I felt a profound sense of closure. Sometimes losing everything shows you what they can't take from you. Your talent, your resilience, your vision, I said during my acceptance speech. They can take your company, but they can't take your ability to build something new. They can take your past, but they can't take your future. In the audience, I spotted Diana, who had believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Mia, who had given me a place to stay when I had nowhere else to go. My team, who had joined me in building something different, something better. And in that moment, I realized that success truly was the best revenge. Not because it hurt James, I no longer cared enough about him to want that, but because it healed me. Because it proved that what he had taken wasn't the most valuable part of me after all. That night, back in my new home, a modest but beautiful house I had purchased with my own money, earned from my own company, I thought about the long, painful journey that had brought me here. The naive trust I had placed in James, the devastating betrayal, the months of despair. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. And yet, I couldn't deny that losing everything had forced me to rebuild in a way that was truer to myself, to create a company that reflected my values rather than compromising them. The empire James and I had built together had been corrupted from within by his greed and deception. But the company I had built from its ashes was stronger, more ethical, and ultimately more successful because it was built on a foundation of hard-won wisdom. He had taken everything I had, but in doing so, he had inadvertently given me the opportunity to create something that he could never take away. Not just a successful company, but a legacy of protection and support for other founders. A model for a different kind of business leadership. Sometimes, the most devastating endings clear the way for the most meaningful beginnings. And sometimes, what looks like the worst thing that could happen to you becomes the catalyst for the best version of yourself to emerge. That is my story. Not a story of victimhood, but of resurrection. Not a cautionary tale, but a roadmap for anyone who has ever lost something they thought defined them. Build something that's truly yours, and no one can take it from you again.